Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are actually talking about Facebook because Facebook wants to help you with your extremist friends on their platform. This should go over well. Here's what's going on. This is coming from The Hill. Facebook is testing out several types of notifications to users in an initiative aimed at tackling violent extremism. Now, the notifications either ask a user if they're concerned that they may know an extremist or simply notify the user that they may have been exposed to extremist content. Screenshots of this basically circulated yesterday. Now, according to Reuters, Facebook said the small test, which is being conducted in the United States on its main platform, was a pilot and would ultimately be used globally to prevent extremism on Facebook. And I quote a Facebook spokesperson that emailed Reuters, "This test is part of our larger network to assess ways to provide resources and support to people on Facebook who may have engaged with or were exposed to extremist content or may know someone who is at risk." In one notification, Facebook asks the users, and I quote, "Are you concerned that someone you know is becoming an extremist?" The message says the company cares about preventing extremism and that, quote, "others in your situation have received confidential support." Also, a quote-unquote get support button appears underneath the message, and the alert sends a user to its support page, according to reporting by CNN. In another notification, Facebook notifies a user that they may have been exposed to, quote, "harmful extremist content." And according to a screenshot of this notification by an actual Facebook user, the message goes on to say that, and I quote, "violent groups try to manipulate your anger and disappointment. You can take action now to protect yourself and others." A get support button also appears under that as well. Now, Facebook said it's working with nonprofit organizations and academic experts in this pilot test. Facebook obviously has been criticized for not doing enough to combat extremism on its platform, and I've done other videos and podcasts on that as they are attempting to figure out ways on basically how to combat this. But this specifically opens up so many different questions. First, what does Facebook consider an extremist, quote unquote, or extremist content? So, for example, I personally read literature from the extreme ends of the political spectrum, not to mention the center, which is pretty much where I believe I am. But I do that for research purposes, for things like my articles or these videos and podcasts, but also to understand the mindset of basically all sides of the aisle as it potentially relates to my job in cybersecurity, not to mention how cybersecurity is being applied to governments worldwide, not just here in the United States. Second, Facebook is one of the largest data miners in the world. And so what are they doing with this information? Are you informing on your friends so that they can build a list of alleged extremists that will be turned over to law enforcement with a warrant or even just freely? What basically does that mean, confidential support? What has ever been confidential on Facebook? So I would be concerned about that. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have a problem with extremism here. There is zero doubt that we have a problem with extremism in society at the moment, worldwide, definitely here in the United States, but we have to be very careful about who we go about, or how we go about identifying these people. Holding views is one thing. Reading literature is another thing. But acting on them is the other thing, is basically another thing altogether, and that's the biggest challenge here. And so how do you differentiate somebody like me that is going to read that extremist literature, as well as, you know, the regular CNN, MSNBC, NBC News, Associated Press, and all that kind of stuff, and discern that I am not a violent extremist in some way, shape, or form? Is it what I post because they're data mining it for rhetoric? What is that? And by virtue of that, what happens if we have false positives? Meaning, if I get a prompt saying, "Hey, we think you have a friend, or do you know of somebody that might be turning extremist?" Does that mean they're data mining all of my friends to say, "Hey, wait a second, Nick's connected to a potential extremist, and he's also, let's say, reading literature on both sides, therefore I'm susceptible, and am I getting onto a list now as well?" These are things I think that Facebook has to answer. It has to be very clear about what it's doing. It has to be transparent when it simply hasn't been transparent in the past. These are things that need to be understood. And as we combat extremism, and we need to combat extremism because there is so much disinformation and misinformation out there. And you know, I've talked about that on my radio show. I've talked about that here in video and podcast form. I've written about it, and on and on and on. We need to do something. But is Facebook the answer to that? Facebook is the largest proliferator, so they have to do something, but is this the right move? I'd love to have this discussion with you. Please let me know what you think. Please keep it civil as well. Ideally, because your definition of extremism may be different than somebody else's, but I think if we can have an open and honest conversation on this, we might actually be able to figure out a better way than what Facebook is doing here, or at least hone Facebook or give them some ideas. Not that they'd ever listen to us because, well, they're Facebook. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter, where apparently we can be tagged as something. And also please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.